I heard Pat couldn't make the show. He died of too much Rhamondre Stevenson exposure. Is that what what the word on the street is?
I guess so.
I genuinely don't I've taken him a few times. I actually find myself taking James White way more at the end of the drafts because he's right there around the same time that Rhamondre Stevenson goes. So why don't we shit on Rhamondre until Pat shows up?
Yeah, I mean, he's really on him. I don't know enough about prospect. There's the stats that he likes. Rhamondre pops in a little bit, but I mean, he's a 4th round pick. He's going to a team that always rotates backs. There's the idea that rookies, will play more late, so he could be this late season hammer. The point I was making to Pat was even if he takes over the job, even if you get it right, and he might not ever get the chance in year 1, but even if you get it right, he might lose a job again because Belichick does that,
Well, and doesn't it feels analogous too. We were talking about this earlier today. Hey, Pat, welcome to the show. We're just starting to talk shit about Rhamondre Stevenson right out of the gate.
Great.
So what I was going to say about him, Ben, is you guys, I heard you and Leone talking about this on the ETR projections pod about Marlon Mack as a handcuff, because I've seen some people talk about him as a late round pick, and you guys were making the point, even if Jonathan Taylor were to go down, well, okay, Hines is going to get more of the pass work. You probably see Jordan Wilkins sliding in, getting some of the early down work. Isn't that the same thing with Rhamondre? Even if Damian Harris goes down, someone else is going to slide in there. James White's still going to have pass catching role. Is it just the rookie thing, Pat, that has you all starry-eyed about Rhamondre?
I think he can basically be a better version of Harris if he gets some of that role, because he can catch passes and he's big. So he's sort of if he gets some of the pass catching role, he's a better version of James White because he could get used to around the goal line too. You
comped him to Rex Burkhead, right? Earlier.
Yeah, he's Rex Burkhead. He's kind of the do-it-all guy. And so if that role is bigger than what Burkhead had at times, that's pretty nice. And Burkhead was pretty usable over the years. So yeah, the play is that he's Rex Burkhead.
And Pat, you said he's your most owned guy on Underdog right now?
No, not my most owned guy.
Okay.
But I'm at 36% on him on Underdog, which does feel a little bit aggressive. That's
you shared that team. For anyone who saw our tweets today, you shared that team and you had Rhamondre on it, and I was I'm getting a little concerned about your Rhamondre exposure because I'm concerned about my own exposure just from drafting with you. We take him a decent amount.
We do take him a decent amount, but there are guys that I like later, and we'll talk about this. But I'm trying to mix it up, and I think part of it is that I haven't finished some of the slow drafts that I'm doing where I probably won't take him because I have new guys that I'm excited about. I think the thing with the 18th round picks is just talk yourself into new guys every couple weeks.
Yeah.
And then you'll have absurd exposure to them, but for a short period of time.
It's kind of like in DFS in a given week when it's a little tighter and I get on one about last year it was KJ Hamler a couple weeks, he's going to get 15 points this week. There's no way he's not. So every one of my lineups has $3,100 KJ Hamler in it. And then when he doesn't get more than 5 points, I'm just dead. I'm just dead across the board. And and that's not a perfect analogy because it is an 18th round pick, but there are other 18th round picks. There are other guys that could hit. And even if Rhamondre hits a little bit, there are guys that could be smashes. So I think you want to mix up exposures to dart throws for sure.
And I think it's easy too to let your stacks and your team investments dictate that. A lot of people are going to be drafting off of the ADP, off of the ETR ranks at the end of their drafts, just by going a little bit further and letting I've noticed I have a few guys like this for different teams. My big flyer on the Falcons, I'm often taking as Cordell Patterson. I'm taking Lynn Bowden sometimes as my last pick.
I wish he had running back eligibility on Underdog.
But
Patterson.
This is the thing. I feel like I can have my cake and eat it too, because even in some 4 and 5 running back builds, I draft him as my 9th or 10th wide receiver with the knowledge I might get some of those running back points there from him, from his score. But I see what you're saying. You're saying you want his score as a running back slot.
I want to be able to use his score as a running back.
That's Lynn Bowden. You get him as a running back slot.
That's a nice one. All right, Lynn Bowden. So I like Ben's idea of this week it's KJ Hamler. This week I'm just gonna draft I'm all in on Lynn Bowden. It's week 7, and then next week's week 8, and I'll pick a new guy.
But if you do let your stacks or your heavy concentrations get that, there on most teams there's one guy that's outside that range. Even Travis Fulgham has been a guy I've been doing that.
I like Travis Fulgham a lot.
But you can get him in any draft you want. Like he's free in the last round.
He's free. You can get Hurts, Rager, Fulgham. It's so easy. And you can get, I mean, depending on where you are, you can sometimes go Hurts, Goddard. Rager is very easy. And then you get Fulgham. You get like triple stack on Hurts, like so cheaply.
It does, Pat, sound like you are explaining a pump and dump scheme. Every week you talk up a new player and then you moved on the following week.
It is like that's kind of what I'm doing actually, because then I talk him up as ADP rises and I jump to the next guy.
Fantasy football pump and dump. With no financial benefit in the short term.
No. it only hurts people. It doesn't even help me.
Ben, I know you haven't been doing as many drafts, but how have you been thinking about kind of the end of draft stuff? Because it's I think it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed chatting with you guys about it because you guys have had, and I've heard elsewhere pretty consistently these takes that, you know, especially at Underdog, because there are so many hyper fragile builds, because the really heavy wide receiver builds are so popular now that wide receivers getting really thin at the end of drafts, that running back is a little bit feels a little bit better at the end of drafts, that there's some really interesting late round quarterbacks that I think is a big thing we should talk about. But at the same time, as I'm starting doing projections, one of the things I'm wondering about this like perception that wide receivers completely dead is like, I mean, we just named a few guys like Fulgham or Lynn Bowden, who I guess has running back eligibility, but guys that are intriguing but aren't being drafted, and it's, you know, like teams are spreading more 3-4 wide receiver sets. They're rotating more. It seems like we're getting a lot more usable wide receivers. I was talking to you guys about, you know, having done the Houston projection about like even Kiki Cutie, who's been like really good in targets per route run most of the years of his career. If he runs more routes, because they're so thin at receiver this year, that like he could easily be 70, 80 catch guy. Like he early in his career, he had these like 8, 10 catch games. I think he had like some 14 catch games in his first year. There were some really positive signs early. I feel like there's maybe it's something to do with like the wrong receivers are being drafted because it's so much deeper and there's so much of a wider pool, but there are some guys out there that aren't being drafted that we can uncover. Not that I have any other great names, but maybe that's just the wrong guys.
And I think too, for me, what feels different this year, although I started drafting on Underdog later in the summer last year, but this year, like some of the 0 RB candidates in the 17th and 18th round, like feel like incredible bets. I mean, talking about guys like Chuba Hubbard, where if Christian McCaffrey goes down, I mean, what is he looking at? He's looking at 15 plus touches a game. If Myles Gaskin goes down, what is Savon Ahmed looking at? He's looking at 15 plus touches a game. We're talking like you're sliding this guy right into your RB2 spot, not even thinking about it. Those guys are readily available. We talk about the wide receivers, the flyers. I've thrown a dart on Cordell Patterson. I need like an injury and him to outperform expectations to make his way into my lineup. Like these running back bets are really nice late.
Yeah, and I've been taking, like I took Jalen Hurd, as kind of a stacking partner with Lance. I've been taking Daz Newsome, was like kind of a backdoor stack with Justin Fields, who is one of Clay's guys. But, like that's pretty thin. Like I would consider taking Freddie Swain as a stack with Russell Wilson. But like, I don't know how much these guys are even seeing the field. If Hurd pulls his hamstring in training camp, he might get cut. Like, it's thin, whereas like James White is sitting there at the end of drafts. Tariq Cohen, Damian Williams, the guys you mentioned, Jerick McKinnon, Justin Jackson, Ty Johnson, who I think will have a decent role.
Rhamondre Stevenson.
I mean, there's tons of guys. I know. I'm trying to move on. There's a lot of guys, and they're gonna have like roles. I mean, James White isn't like the best guy ever, but I think he might be Jack Miller's most exposed guy, highest exposure guy. I was looking at a tweet he sent out the other day, but it's like, I get it, because he's free, and if you're able to get a guy with a role like that, then you kind of have like a 2v2 setup where you're like, well, wait, maybe I don't take this running back, in round 10 and I grab another receiver if I know I can get one of these guys for free later. And so that's kind of like what I've been thinking, like, should I actually be going, like, let's say 5 running backs, but plan for a couple of them to be really cheap, And then that allows me to, maybe go a little bit heavier at wide receiver and end up with probably similar firepower to what I would have had last year. But the ADP is forcing my hand a little bit in both directions.
Yeah, and I know, Ben, you and Sean were talking about this on your guys' new podcast, Stealing Bananas, which everyone needs to check out if they haven't gotten a chance to download that yet. And you guys were talking about, like, who are the types of players that even if they slip, like, I'm still not taking them. And I find myself in that situation on Underdog a lot where I'll see a Miles Sanders or DeAndre Swift fall a full round, and the VBD guy in me is like, oh, this looks pretty nice, but I'm still like, the opportunity cost of passing on DJ Moore here is massive. And so I think that's also a really hard thing when I go through these drafts. I'm like, even when there's running back values, it's like there's so many good running backs late or good running back bets late that I just want to keep loading up on receivers over and over in rounds 3 through 10.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think it's smart to, like, that was something we were talking about today, was like this idea of sort of like drafting back to front. That's something that Sean has talked about a ton. I remember I wrote about it at RotoViz years ago. Because there were certain guys that I really liked at the ends of drafts, I was sort of recalibrating my approach early in drafts. I mean, even like, I think way back then I was talking about more like, redraft and even like home leagues. Like, if you just do the small amount of work of thinking through some targets that you feel like you're a really good bet to get, like Pat knows he can get Rhamondre Stevenson in every draft. If he really wants him that bad, he can think through that. He's going to take him there. He's going to make
Don't say it like that.
So how is that going to inform his earlier round decisions? And I don't know. I think that makes a ton of sense to kind of work back to front. And you guys have been seeing these trends. I mean, you guys were talking about it with quarterback too, and I think that's a huge one that we wanted to talk about, where some of these potential late round quarterback builds seem really great this year.
Well, to the back to front point, like, it isn't just like, oh man, I gotta hammer this, like, my favorite zero running back target is always there on the 18th. It's just like, take your pick. Like, there's going to be a guy, at least at the very end of round 17, who you're like, he's going to play a lot this year at running back.
Yeah, and maybe
like in every draft.
Maybe more than the point I made about Rhamondre Stevenson specifically is that exact point that you just made, is like, if you have the idea of positional strength or weakness in areas, I mean, you're going to get a running back there. You feel good about that. I mean, then act on that earlier. Act on
right.
Yeah, and like the more drafts I do, and I mix up my starts a lot. I've done the hyper fragile, I've done the 0RB, I've done the anchor, whatever, yada yada. I've done them all. But the one thing that I keep coming back to is at every point in the draft, there are palatable running backs for me to take. Like, I can stomach them at this point, but that is not the case for wide receivers. After around round 11, I'm really starting to feel nervous. I'm either reaching for my Rondell Moore, I'm reaching to complete a stack, and then all of a sudden I'm staring at, Brashad Perriman, Denzel Mims, and like KJ Hamler. Like, it dries up so quickly, and it just doesn't do it that way with running back. And I just keep coming back to all these drafts, like prioritize wide receiver, because I know I'm going to like these running backs in rounds 12 through 15.
Yeah, and I guess, like, I'm just trying to think through, like, what to do with that information, because I completely agree with you. It is tough, though, like, if you're just taking like 4 running backs, and let's say hypothetically, I don't think we would do this, but if you were to take 4 running backs and 2 of them came from like round 16 and 17, that feels like aggressively fragile. So it's like, all right, well then you probably need a 5th, but could you go 1 in the first round, 1 in, let's say, like the 9th round, and then 3 in like 15, 16, 17? Because that's something I'm like getting close to doing.
Do you have a running back in round 9 that you tend to like?
I just there's a lot of guys there. It's it's actually James Conner. It's not Rojo this year. I've been hammering James Conner. I just cannot stop. I'd get some Rojo, because in that, if I go 1 and then I go 2 in that range, I'll mix in Rojo. But James Conner is really the guy there that just jumps out to me as mispriced.
Where are you on Conner, Ben? As far as him, Chase Edmonds, feel free to mention Eno Benjamin if you'd like.
Yeah, I've been okay with his price. He's not a guy that I want to be heavily exposed to. It was a pretty small contract. I asked Sean about him, actually. on one of our first episodes, and he made the point that I certainly subscribe to, that once a running back sort of gets hurt and is at sort of this age, and we've seen at least some production decline, we just don't see it turn around a lot. He doesn't have to do a ton in this Kenyon Drake role to be effective, but and at his price, it's like, yeah, you're probably going to get usable weeks, but there's risk there too. Like, he can miss time, and they could just not necessarily be all in on him. They only gave him a $2 million 1-year deal. Like I keep going back to the contract in my head. It feels like an egregious misprice, but at the same time, like, would I be stoked about drafting him in the 6th round? No, I probably wouldn't take him.
No, I would be. Yeah, it's more mispriced in the sense that I'm like, I can't believe I'm happy to take James Conner, because I just feel like he's just always overpriced.
Yeah, and to me, like, a few things, it was the amount of goal line touches they gave Kenyon Drake relative to Chase Edmonds. I think there's an assumption there that if he takes even 80% of those goal line touches and red zone touches that Drake was getting, that's going to be nice. I think there's also an expectation that the Cardinals offense is going to be a little better this year. I think they bring in AJ Green, they bring in Rondale Moore. This is a huge upgrade on what they were doing. I think there's a chance for more plays, more, goal line opportunities. And if Conner has the inside track to that role, he could just fall into the end zone 8 times just through natural kind of red zone progressions. I don't know.
The other thing is that, like, this role that we're talking about, like the Drake role and the Edmonds role, like, we don't know that that's exactly how it's going to break out. And Kenyon Drake was not a very good pass catcher. He's never been really good pass catcher. Am I frozen?
I only got one screenshot, but you had 2 incredible frozen screenshots there, Pat.
All right. Well, I pulled up some stats to make sure I referenced the right stat on James Conner, and the spreadsheet is so absurdly large that it froze my head. So that's what happened. I'll just quote this from memory, but forgive me if I'm off by a percentage or two. But James Conner had 85% of Pittsburgh's running back passing snaps last year. So the thing that partly why he wasn't a workhorse is he was asked to pass block a ton. As we know, Pittsburgh's offensive line sucks. This is one of the reasons why I'm not psyched about Najee Harris, because I think he will have all the passing snaps, and so did James Conner, and it still wasn't that great. But James Conner is a pretty decent receiver. I think he's a better receiver than Kenyon Drake, and he's a good pass blocker. And I think he could challenge some of what Edmonds is getting as a receiver. Like, I think he could have a Kenyon Drake role plus. I don't think that's his ceiling. So to me, like, I don't understand why he's not going ahead of Chase Edmonds. Not that I really want to be taking him where Chase Edmonds is going or earlier, but I just, knowing fantasy football, I'm like, why is he here and Chase Edmonds is gone?
As we're sitting here talking about these things, and I'm thinking about the Bime4 thread earlier, that was great. And we talk about Eric Bime4 a lot on this show, and you should be following him. He doesn't have very many followers, but we
should invite him on one of these episodes.
Yeah, we should. His stuff has been awesome.
He's incredibly sharp. He did a thread about the market has certain wide receivers higher than others, and I was just thinking about this with the James Conner thing, because you could go the other way with it too, where like Chase Edmonds is actually the workhorse, and Conner just was brought in on this 1-year $2 million deal as a backup.
I'd probably be making that case if the prices were flipped.
Yeah, I mean, you almost could. And Bime4's thread was about wide receivers, but he killed the whole thread by mentioning AJ Brown and Julio Jones first. But his point was
he would have got booted from the show with that thread.
The cheaper receiver could lead in some of these places. He talked about Miami. We've talked about that on this show, about how Devontae Parker could lead in targets. He talked about the Bengals, where we don't really know. Chase is going the highest. It could be Boyd, who was the third highest. I mean, he's a very good receiver in his own right. He talked about the Niners, we've talked about on the show, Ayuk and Debo, and I think Debo could lead that team in targets, especially with all the jet motion tip passes he gets. And so thinking about that and thinking about a lot of things we're talking about here, the running backs, the league is always sort of evolving. That's what me and Sean are going to talk about for our show next week. So maybe I'm just thinking about this a little bit too much right now, but I'm wondering if we're getting worse at ADP, basically, because there are more receivers on every team. There are more running backs on a lot of these rosters, and I think less defined roles than there used to be in a lot of spots. And we've always sort of trusted ADP, but I don't feel like I've ever felt like I do this year, that a lot of these situations could just be outright wrong. I mean, maybe have been too trustworthy of ADP in the past, and sometimes they are just outright wrong. But I feel like this year there's a lot that I look at and I just go, I don't have any kind of concept of whether that's accurate or not. And I don't think anyone really does know what the roles are going to be, or especially like at wide receiver where they're going to run the same amount of routes in these spread offenses. There's no like number one anymore. There's no pass plays where one receiver runs a route like there used to be 10, 15 years ago. There's now 2 or 3 running a route in every single pass play. And the running backs too. There's a lot of situations we don't know. So I'm kind of curious if do you guys think that's crazy, or if like there's some spots where it's less known this year than in the past? I don't know.
Well, there's more decisions to your point. Like there's more people on the field.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I know what you're saying. I guess I would have to know the exact data on how many new receivers, how many players we have changing teams. But a lot of these situations feel in flux. Even the quarterback change. Like you look at a team like Miami, Bime4 highlighted him there. So we have Tua, who we're hopeful there's a change in his play. You know, we didn't even get to see a full season from him last year. They draft Jalen Waddle. They bring Will Fuller in from free agency. Like how many more kind of unique variables could you have for an offense? Like the whole offense is different in some form or another. And like you said, Devontae Parker is the lowest in ADP of all 3 of those. And he's the veteran incumbent who has been consistently good there. So like we're all making these assumptions, and I'm with you. I could see all 3 of those wide receivers in any order, and none of them would shock me. And yet we're drafting them as if we're sure Devontae Parker is now 3rd in target share.
And Jacksonville's like that. And New York's like that, the Jets. You know, complete changeover. And people, New York, they don't have quite as much conviction, although they're very sure about Michael Carter. This is why I liked mixing in Ty Johnson at the end, because you're like, Ty Johnson played on a lot of passing snaps last year, developed a little bit as a receiver. He's pretty fast. Like we don't know. So, you know, the Michael Carter, Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman stuff, there's a lot of certainty there that I don't think is necessarily warranted. But then Jacksonville, obviously, you know, the Viska Shark thing. That's just, I cannot stop drafting Viska. It's not a bit.
Yeah, it's not a bit. That's one where I'm frustrated. I'm not drafting as much now because I think that will correct by August. But
I will admit, I haven't been getting a ton of Viska because he's creeping up almost in that Debo Michael Gallup range, Mike Williams range on Underdog, and I haven't been getting it. Like he is getting pricey.
I'm happily taking him there.
Yeah, he should be higher.
Yeah, I think he's arguably ahead of Gallup. I mean, the play is that he's his number 1 wide receiver. He's the number 1 wide receiver on a team with suddenly has good quarterback play. I mean, that's the play. I'm not saying it's going to happen necessarily, but I mean, there's a path there. Where Gallup, I mean, there's no way.
I can't believe I have to be the one fudding Viska here. I don't know. I mean, this is the classic.
Well, it makes sense because Pat and I were the ones who were actually originally on him, and you.
That is true.
Still wrote our coattails. So.
Yeah, except only one person did this. This is all I have to say to you guys. Which of you guys have a signed mini LaVisca Chenault helmet in your office? Enough said, Your Honor.
Which of you guys have zero exposure to Viska on Underdog?
I tried to like roll back the tape and check receipts, and you were like, "This is the only clip that matters. Like this is the clip." No, that was great.
I have Viska exposure, but I am.
I think over Gallup for sure. I'll put it this way. I mean, I've been very anti projections, but when I did my show with Leona the other day, I had Viska projected to lead the team in targets, and I think it's very defensible. And you're already talking about a guy who has a really good profile, was pretty good in targets per route run as a rookie, was a little banged up, didn't play a ton.
Led the team, by the way, in yards per route run.
Yeah, injury shortened games at times, but was certainly like showed flashes and has that really good profile. And now he's running routes in an area of the field where he doesn't have much competition. Chark and Jones sort of are going to overlap a little bit. I mean, and then he's tearing up camp, and we, like I said on a couple weeks ago, we should have had pretty flimsy priors with Jacksonville. What we thought, the market has liked Chark ahead of Viska, but I said then that I think Viska should go ahead of Chark, and I was like, yeah, I don't really want to blow his ADP up too much, but I think that's like a really defensible stance. I think that's the way it should be.
So a couple things just to kind of defend my not massive Viska exposure right now. I think going back to our kind of thing about Miami, I think there is a lot of uncertainty in new variables. We have an entire new coaching staff. We have a new quarterback. We have, a new free agent signing in Marvin Jones. So there is a lot of uncertainty there. I also don't love their schedule. They're week 16 and 17. They are at New York Jets in the cold in December, and then at New England week 17. So it's like not a team I've been targeting a lot. Lawrence has gotten a little expensive too, so those stacks get a little more difficult because I do like Justin Fields and Trey Lance more. So it's more about like these kind of extenuating factors. I still love Viska in my heart and in a vacuum, but there's reasons why I'm not reaching.
Yeah, that's fair. And especially in like big tournaments, when you're talking about like comparing him to Gallup, like, yeah, the Dallas stack is way more enticing. I mean, I think those things are fair.
Yeah, and I think Gallup probably outscores him like more in more seasons, in more like simulations of this season. Gallup probably outscores him, but the Viska like upside hits are like you needed to have them.
That's
like,
the reason
you needed to have Viska seasons.
He's the guy that can beat ADP by 5 rounds. I mean, he's the guy that can define the season. Like I
agree with that.
Yeah,
of course. And so that's why I just can't stop taking him. It's so enticing because you get to that level where it's like, is this going to be the Michael Gallup? You had to have Michael Gallup season. It works as part of a stack, and I like Gallup. I actually like Gallup a lot, so I don't want to pick on him. But and the fact that you're not even usually having to make that choice, he's like a consolation prize to those guys usually.
You're probably better off, Pete, because by the time week 1 rolls around, you're going to have Viska on so many high stakes teams. At least you'll have best ball mania teams that are your stacks are elsewhere, and you'll have other exposure.
You'll have plenty of exposure.
I honestly am looking forward to kind of we're going to start drafting on FFPC a lot here in the next few weeks, going forward to the start of the season. Like there are going to be some meaningful differences in what players you can get there, and I do think Viska will probably have a much more palatable price throughout draft season on FFPC relative to Underdog, where the wide receiver craze is more real than it's ever been.
Yeah, and it will never hit FFPC. It's one of the reasons we love FFPC. They'll never draft wide receivers there. They won't do it. I mean, they will, but they love their running back so much. It's a beautiful thing. I will say on the Urban Meyer thing, and to your point, Pete, about like kind of tempering expectations with uncertainty. And this is why I would say that I think in more seasons, Gallup does outscore Viska. It's like one thing with Urban Meyer, I do worry about like him pigeonholing guys in roles, because we saw that with like the Ohio State guys, and also him rotating the wide receivers. This is one of the things that I think like we don't necessarily know about them. Like, and they've done this at times in college as well. Like they've had a heavy rotation of wide receivers. I don't know if that's because they had so many awesome wide receivers. I'm hoping it is. But you see the Colts rotate their wide receivers very, very heavily. You see the Eagles last year rotating their wide receivers very, very heavily, and it just kills value. And so if we get that, and I think it's a possibility, and Colin Johnson's getting a lot of snaps, and they're just kind of not committing to any one of these guys above 75% of routes run, then it's just going to suck for everyone, and we're not going to be happy with our Viska shares at all.
And I think that's the concern too. Like we all saw it. We were all in on Viska last year watching him. We saw how talented he looks, and we're just screaming at the television, like, give this guy 8 to 9 targets a game and just see how incredible it is. I know we have a new coaching staff, but I do think there is that risk of like they continue to pigeonhole him in some way. But like if we do get alpha wide receiver Laviska getting 8 to 10 targets a game, I mean, it's blast off.
I just noticed that when Pat took a drink of his beer, his backdrop was showing on it. It was pretty awesome. Pat, what are you drinking?
What do you mean?
Hold up your beer.
Oh, wow.
Because of the green screen.
Oh, yeah. Is there green on that?
Yeah, there's green.
Yeah.
It's a single cut double IPA. Pretty nice. Single cut's a good brewery in
single cut?
Queens.
I mean, what does even a single
Queens.
cut mean for a beer?
I don't know if it's beer related. just a good brewery, man.
Oh, the beer, it's called Stevenson. Okay.
I don't know, man. I just drink the beer.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have Viska. Like, even if he buries
yeah.
us, I'm going to be so excited just to make that bet.
So Michael says this is going 803 in FFPC, which is actually like pretty
priced.
comparable to Underdog. So maybe I'm not getting the discount there that I wanted.
Oh, I was wrong about the FFPC. They're starting to love wide receivers. I hate it.
Yeah, wasn't there? What was it? I've seen some of the drafts where like Chubb has fallen to the 2-3 turn, and FFPC drafts. I mean, the old FFPC drafts I know would never let Chubb fall to 212.
Let's wait until August before we declare that the FFPC has changed its stripes. Okay, let's wait. And I want to be in Vegas and see the draft boards before I say things have changed.
How about, like, speaking of things that have changed, obviously the Underdog stuff feels different. I saw Liam, my chess coach, in the chat here talking earlier about we've never had this much best ball content. I mean, last year best ball was still right. Like, there was not a lot.
When did Underdog launch? They didn't even launch until like what? May?
They were like May or June. I know I didn't start doing my like regular Underdog videos till like late July, early August. There was no like ETR wasn't doing best ball content last year. Like there was not.
I mean, they were doing the hyper fragile thing, stacking. They were doing best ball content.
No, they weren't. That Justin was doing that in drafts, but like there
Leone was writing about stacking and hyper fragile.
Leone wrote like 2 articles. I don't think he would get upset at me saying that. There was like 2 articles on their site. There was
you're right. I'm not trying to compare it to what they're doing this year. They're doing a lot more, but they did cover best ball.
Yeah, no, they did. But I'm just like the volume. I guess the point is like the ADPs are like way, way more efficient. The structural drafting, even more so, is way more efficient this year because so much of that discourse from ETR and Leone and Herzig is driving drafter strategies. I guess the question I'm trying to get at is we also had the unique variable last year of no training camps too, and ADPs kind of held. And I'm expecting a pretty seismic shift in ADPs once we hit training camp, and even more so when we hit preseason. Like I feel like this is gonna be like popcorn guys all over the map.
And especially if what I said about us not knowing who sort of the lead roles are or things like that is it all true, in the modern NFL. Yeah, as soon as we start getting word on, this guy's running as the number 1 or this or that or whatever, like you would expect exactly what you just said.
And one thing, so Liam's been talking about this point, and this has been brought up even last year. It's been brought up when there was stuff with like the Tyreek Hill suspension of like, can you draft guys who meaningfully jump in ADP over the course of the season, whether due to bullish news or injuries or whatever? My thought in general is if you already have your exposures, that's good, but there's still a level set across the entire team, right? Like that information kind of advantage is spread out. Like when you are drafting that guy 2 rounds ahead of ADP from where he was going, you also have more information on the guys you're drafting later in the draft that the earlier drafters who got the deal didn't have. So I don't know. I guess I'm more inclined to think that it more or less levels out. But where are you guys on this idea of, let's say a guy who people got before the draft or whatever jumps a ton?
I mean, if the idea is there's like 4 or 5 league winners, and to take one of these things down, you need a couple of them. Like you had to have Kamara last year with his monster last week. I mean, Herzig was the only one in the final group that had him, but obviously there was
2 guys. Devontae Adams went on. I mean, it was actually a crazy week 16 last year, and week 15.
Yeah, and if the idea is that there's a few of those guys, then probably there's going to be a better combination. But I tend to think that like across an entire roster, you could still have other difference makers. And yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily buy that you're not competing for first in that regard, because a lot of times the guys that raise an ADP, they raise justifiably and they wind up being very good picks. I don't know. This is totally narrative, but I feel like a lot of them don't move up high enough because people are like, they anchor to the past ADP. Mm-hmm. Man, I always go back to the year Arian Foster absolutely broke out, but he jumped a bunch of rounds. This is like when I first had this take. He ended up in like the 4th or 5th round, and I wanted him in like several different drafts. My very last draft was a home league draft, and I was going to take him no matter what in the 5th round. It was the highest I'd seen him go, and he went in the 4th in that one. One of these guys in my league had heard he was the buzz guy, and then he goes in the 4th round. he ended up being like the RB1 that year. And it's like a lot of times guys that jump up, they don't jump up high enough, it feels like. So I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, there's going to be teams that got a great discount on that, but it still could be a good pick at the time you take him. And if he ends up being a very key piece, like not taking him just because his ADP rose is, I don't know, I feel like you're putting a hand behind your back a little bit there too.
Yeah, I think you might be overestimating like how many of your picks are going to hit. You know, like if we got Stefon Diggs on the Crack Rock team, I think in the 6th. If we had gotten him in the 4th,
doesn't matter.
It wouldn't have changed anything. Like it wouldn't have changed. I think we took like Odell Beckham.
We took Odell.
Yeah. So just truly did not matter. Like we could have taken him in the 4th. We just needed to get Diggs on that team. That period. That's what needed to happen, and we did it.
I completely agree with that point. It's IDing the 3 or 4 league winners, and it doesn't ultimately matter. Sometimes those come from later pockets of the draft. Sometimes they're coming from earlier pockets of the draft. Like as an example, let's say Marvin Jones goes down and Laviska's ADP shoots up another 2 rounds or whatever. Like that doesn't make Laviska a bad pick in the 6th round. Like we have new information that justifies that he's now warranted as a 6th round pick. Like I'm not worried that other people have him in the 8th round, because it still goes back to, I have more information when I drafted this 6th round team than they did. And to Pat's point, like you still have to hit on an outsized portion of your picks to even win one of these.
And another way to think about it I totally agree with those points, would be to say like the Tyreek Hill thing. Okay, some people took him in like the 13th, and then you had to take him in like the 3rd or whatever. Okay, you take him in the 3rd, he winds up being a guy you have to have. You can offset that immediately by just hitting on a different 13th round pick. I mean, obviously, to win this thing, you're going to have to hit on big picks elsewhere. It's just another way to think about what Pete just said. If there's 3 or 4 guys that you have to have on your team, you just think of it as like a 2v2. That guy got an extra 3rd round pick that you didn't get. That extra 3rd round pick might be a bust. Or a lot of other teams drafted Tyreek Hill late that got extra 3rd round picks. But if there wasn't like a really key player that you had to have in the 3rd round, then there might not be the right combination. The other key player might have been another 13th round pick. I don't know if I'm saying that well, but yeah, as soon as you take one that's a different late round pick that massively outperforms ADP, you basically offset the advantage that those Tyreek Hill teams had.
I've been thinking a lot about, because now I've been doing so many of these drafts, of mixing up my combinations. Like I should probably actually look at the data to know, but I know anecdotally I've done a ton of George Kittle, Debo, Trey Lance stacks, and I push myself to get combinations of Kittle and Ayuk and Ayuk and Debo, just to get me off of like what's the easy stacks based on where these pockets of drafting have allowed me to get these guys. Just knowing that same thing, I'm not so certain that Debo's going to outscore Ayuk or that whatever. Like I want all the combinations because I love the 49ers upside. I like that general offense. I want to make a bet on that, not on some hyper specific combo that falls into my ADP pockets.
Yeah, I like that. Man, you can get Russ and DK. That's the one that's like a little harder to get. You can pull that off. It feels so good. That's the one I really try to prioritize if it's at all possible. But I just pulled up Justin's team that won the Best Ball Mania last year, right? He had Kamara, Carson, Montgomery, and Pollard at running back. So he hit on Montgomery and Kamara, basically. He had Ridley, Hilton, Boyd, John Brown, Robbie Anderson, James Washington, Brian Edwards, Kendrick Bourne, KJ Hamler.
Robbie was a huge one.
He hit a huge home run with Robbie. Calvin Ridley hit big. Boyd was okay. Like, there's not a ton there. And then he had Matt Ryan, Tom Brady, and Joe Burrow at quarterback. Loses Burrow, obviously. Brady has an awesome season. And they had Kelsey and Gronk at tight end. So there's like clear, like, you had to have Kelsey last year. You had to have Kamara. Montgomery was huge. Robbie Anderson was huge. But it's not like, in a Best Ball Mania team, you might expect to see, as we sit here today and we think every pick that we make is going to hit, you might expect to see a ton, a roster like an all-star roster.
Yeah.
And it's not that.
It's not.
Yeah, and I showed this on a Monday stream, but this was a few weeks ago. This was my 0 RB team that finished 5th in the $5 underdog tournament last year. Literally not a good running back in sight, but I nailed the early combination of pass catchers that all had huge seasons. Adams, Kelsey, Ridley, AJ Brown, Diggs, and Lamb. And then I got some nice stacks, late stacks with like the Tannehill and Corey Davis worked out pretty well and stuff like this. But this was literally, and this is why I love Zero RB so much, is I want to cycle through these pass catchers in rounds 1 through 7 and get as many possible combinations of these guys that we know have the potential to be top 5 at the position.
I mean, literally compared to the lotto, like there's 5 numbers or 6 numbers, and there's a ton more people buying lotto tickets, and there's not winners sometimes. I mean, I think it's easy to think that somebody's going to have the perfect combination of players, but there are more players than numbers in the lotto. There are more players on a team. Like it's, I mean, I guess that means maybe your odds are better, but to get every single player that was a key piece, like to Pat's point, like Herzig's team wasn't necessarily an all-star team. I mean, I think we like to think that because there's so many teams out there, there's going to be a perfect team. There's so many combinations. There's so many combinations that are possible, and there's probably not actually going to be a perfect team.
Yeah, Liam is making the point that, this is the milli maker now, which is true. Like this is the milli maker. You're going to need the nuts. But you're going to need the nuts in the playoffs. You're not going to need the nuts to get to the playoffs because you're still competing. You're still finishing top 2 in your league. So you're going to need to have the guys that went off in those specific weeks. But the team that gets there, I think this emphasizes my point even more. The team that gets there is going to have those players that you had to have for weeks 15, 16, and 17. The extra game screwed me up. So it's not going to have like, oh man, he hit on every single one of his picks. It's not what this team's going to look like.
It's going to have David Montgomery instead, who sucks.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it just goes back to all of these same principles that we've talking about. Have conviction in your structure, in the overall how you're drafting, have loose convictions in the specific players you love, and continue to draft and mix up those combinations. Like I now, register, okay, I have a Jonathan Taylor with Devontae Adams team. Okay, now I have a Jonathan Taylor with a Calvin Ridley team. I have a Calvin or a Joe Mixon with a Kelsey team. Like all of these, like I'm trying to hit the nuts, but then I'm going to draft within the structures I'm comfortable with the rest of the draft.
Yeah. One thing I want to talk kind of to this point about, needing the nuts and it being like a bigger tournament. We wanted to talk about this anyway, but the 3 quarterback versus 2 quarterback conversation, because we just see with all of these, we just went over how low probability every draft pick really is. And it's almost like you don't even need to hit on that many of them to take down a bunch of money. So when you talk about what you're going to get out of your 17th and 18th round picks, the expected value is so low of those picks. If I'm very tempted to take a quarterback there, even if I have like Russell Wilson, and I get so I had Russell Wilson and Ryan Fitzpatrick in a draft, which it occurred to me too late that they have the same buy. I really like the stacks. I got Washington, I got Seattle, and then I realized I have 2 quarterbacks the same buy. I took Ben Roethlisberger in like the end of the 17th round. So doing that, I felt like, well, hang on, this is actually kind of interesting because, again, you're going to need the nuts through the 3 playoff weeks. And getting a quarterback who's going to be starting there unless he's hurt gives you I think a meaningfully better chance of having the nuts at quarterback through those weeks. It could be the difference of you advancing in one of those single week tournaments or not. So compared to the opportunity cost of a typical 17th and 18th round pick, especially given what we were saying earlier about how thin wide receiver is this year in those rounds, it's tempting for me to take like a 3 quarterback approach, even with an elite quarterback. But I don't know. I think that's generally not something that people recommend. But
they don't recommend it based on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't recommend it mostly based on win rates and structural win rates, which are, I mean, I know Leone and some of the people that have done that have looked at like top 0.1% teams and things like that. But that's not even, I'm not sure the correct way to look at it, because like there's no real way, like great way to look at what Pat's describing, which is that you have to be not just top 0.1% for the whole year in total points. You have to be really good week after week in those important weeks, and then win that massive GPP in the final week. So I think what you're saying is a really sharp way of trying to consider the way we can look at past data, but also consider that past data might not necessarily inform the specific contest or the specific structure we're looking at. And I really enjoyed this conversation you guys were having earlier. But yeah, I mean, the 3 quarterback thing, like if you have 3 stacks, like I completely agree with that. I think it raises your potential ceiling each of those weeks in a way that I'm not sure we have any data that really is going to be able to refute whether 2 or 3 quarterbacks is the correct way to maximize ceiling for consecutive weeks over that type of a span. And I think if we did, you might be right. Your theory might be right. I think it's a really good hypothesis.
To be clear, I would only do this with, like, if I went Russ, then it would be someone really cheap and then another guy that's really cheap. I wouldn't go Russ, Lawrence in a third. I don't think, but go ahead.
So no, yeah. To me though, like you got me thinking about the 3 quarterback build, but not taking the Russ in that I see the opportunity cost there at that, whatever he's going, 5th, 6th, 7th round, like so high. Like I could be taking a Gallup, a Robbie Anderson, a Viska in that range. The point of taking the Russell Wilson there is he frees you up to draft only 2 quarterbacks, and he's freeing up an extra wide receiver spot for you later in the draft, assuming you were going to take a wide receiver there otherwise. So then you're asking yourself the question, is like a KJ Hamler and Travis Fulgham and Russell Wilson better than the 2v2 of the Debo versus the 2 quarterbacks late, the Zach Wilson and the Jameis Winston?
You would just, like, when you put it like that, you would way rather take the Debo and the 2 QBs.
And that's and that's the thing that I've been coming around on. The opportunity cost in these drafts, round 7 through 10, before the wide receivers dry up, is so massive. And then the counter argument is, can we find guys with upside late in the draft? And I think it's a finite number of guys, but guys like Tua, and then if you really stretch, Zach Wilson, Jameis Winston. I don't know if you guys have any other names there, but those 2v2s I think can break much better in the favor of getting the wide receiver early.
Yeah, the rookie QBs also, but this is another really sharp thing I thought you guys talked about earlier, just to try to like generalize it, is that our past data is on old ADP trends, and you guys have noticed changing ADP trends this year where wide receivers are getting hammered so much more that it's really gross in the 17th, 18th round. It's worse than prior years. Also, quarterbacks are going higher than ever. I saw some data. I wish I could remember who it was, but it was TJ Hernandez did a good thread on it from 4 for 4, and he mentioned that wide receivers are going higher than ever. But there's also some really good opportunities late. We just named several, and so because of the 2021 drafting trends, like every year in fantasy football, I've been doing this for a lot of years. Every year we overreact to the prior years. This is something Sean and I talk about a ton when we just talk on the side. Like Sean mentions this all the time too. It's always, it's a comment he put into, this is a funny story. I wrote a really long, like 2,000 word article. It's one of my best articles ever.
You writing a long article? That doesn't sound like you.
It doesn't sound like me at all. I wrote a super long article and I still wrote it. Sean edited it. He put one line in it and it said, something about every year drafters overreact to the trends from the prior season, something like that. And somebody on Twitter shared the article and quoted that one article and said, "This is such a great comment, yada, yada, yada." And I was just like, God damn it. I wrote 2,000 words and you put out the one fucking sentence.
It's like a draft. It's like a draft.
Yeah.
You only have to hit one sentence in your article.
But it was Sean's sentence. It's like, God, that's the one sentence you quoted. That's fantastic. No, but we do this every year. And the thing is, it's different based on how that year played out to a certain degree. Obviously last year, early tight end looked amazing because the early tight ends were great. If they go down, people aren't drafting early tight ends as much. That doesn't mean that the potential value that early tight end could provide was any different. There was a few years where early tight ends were wasteland. Like Gronk was getting hurt and Jimmy Graham was not performing. And people were saying early tight ends is the biggest thing that can sink your team because that was what the data from those prior seasons said. Now we're back to where early tight ends fantastic. And it had been prior to that. when Graham and Gronk were awesome. So anyway, the larger point I'm making is like everything changes every year. So we should expect not everything, but some things change. We should expect the lessons from 2021 to be slightly different. And if ADP is shifting, we can already kind of guess some ways that what might be the lessons from 2021 beforehand. And so you guys are sitting here talking about what that might be. I think that's super sharp. Like, yeah, the data might not show it yet, but your 2v1 that you just said, those receivers are not good receivers, relative to the potential quarterbacks you can get there. So you're already kind of thinking ahead, what could the lessons be from 2021 before we play it out based on the 2021 ADP? And I think every drafter should be doing that, whether it's this particular point or a larger, a different trend.
And we see, whether there's a combination of things that affect next year's ADP from a macro sense, right? It's people overreacting to things. So let's say, we've seen the elite quarterbacks last year. Now all the quarterbacks are being drafted earlier than they've ever been, at least that top 7 or 8 guys. On the other hand, we see good content making drafters sharper. Like the RB dead zone almost is ceasing to exist right now. I mean, the RB dead zone is made of guys like Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift, who actually have some nice high value touch upside and don't profile as like typical dead zone backs. And that's because the content has gotten so sharp. So it's like, where is the pendulum swung too far now that we can exploit it in the other direction?
Right.
Yeah. And Liam made a good point here that, because the tournament size in week 17 is so much larger, that's really where you need the nuts. But I think in some ways that makes me wonder about the 3 quarterback thing even more, because it's like, if you could just get like think about it, like, okay, if I can just get 1 week out of my 18th round pick in week 17 and it could win me a tournament, that's so much more likely to come at quarterback than anywhere else, I think. Because the guys can be starting. There's guys available at quarterback in like this late 17th, 18th round that are starting week 17 this year, barring injury.
And to Pete's point about the 3v3 again, like Debo was going to provide you more value than probably Hamler and Fulgham combined. It's very unlikely that you hit on both of those receivers in a way that they're both going to provide you value in week 18. And so you needed those 2 instead of the 1 earlier receiver. You're so much more likely to get a usable week, a big week out of that earlier receiver than either of the 2, to the point where having 2, like the only value that having 2 could provide is if they both smash that week. But it's just like that's such a low probability thing that they're both going to smash, and so you're using an earlier pick on a premium position, and that's setting you up better that way too.
I guess the counter would be that you could hit on a guy that helps you the whole season. Whereas, like, you might not need this bad quarterback who's probably not going to start for you more than once in the whole season. But your odds of hitting on that guy are so low to help you at all that I am tempted to just go quarterback.
Yeah. And I think it's tough. Like, we all love RotoViz. I mean, they're basing a lot of their research right now on kind of historical win rates, macro trend stuff, which I think really point us in the right direction for what strategies generally work. But those macro trend data, those aren't engineered to win first place in a Millie Maker, right? Like, we need to massively embrace like fragility in those situations. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I just think it's important to note that like the strategies for winning a 12-team league consistently are massively different than trying to take first place down in underdogs tournament.
But yeah, I mean, and the baby out with the bathwater thing is what I was trying to kind of say with my longer thing was like there's different sort of themes every year, and yet there's things that we know over larger windows, multi-season, data sets that work, right? But we don't know what will be the prime thing in 2021. It could be late round tight end. It has been before. There was a year where Kirk Cousins and Jordan Reed, when they were together in Washington, Kirk Cousins had the most quarterback points in week 14 to 16 ever, I think it was at that time. I remember writing about it the next offseason. It was either the most or like top 3 or something. And Jordan Reed had the most tight end points in week 14 to 16 by a lot. He had a monster week 14 to 16 run. And so you had this stack that if there was those tournaments back then, I can almost guarantee the winner would have had Kirk Cousins and Jordan Reed stacked that year. There was the year with Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin, where Baldwin wound up with like 14 TDs. They hit for like 7 TDs in that 3-week span. He had like Baldwin had a 3 TD game in weeks 14 to 16. That window, the playoff window, was won by those guys. There's been years where it's been like an elite running back, the Todd Gurley year. Obviously Kamara last year was huge. But like the thing that actually really shines through in 2021, we don't know yet. It could be any of a number of different trends. There have been seasons that have led us to believe that late round tight end is the only viable option because early round tight ends got hurt. There have been seasons that have been way better for zero running back. There's seasons that have been better for early running backs, a couple years ago when all the running backs stayed healthy. So, you have to know the broader trends, but you also have to be willing to be open. You don't want to make just like the baby with the bathwater point. You don't want to make completely ridiculous structural decisions. It's not an answer to just go best player available. Like that is not the solution. You can still have an edge by making smart structural decisions and understanding the data, but you have to be willing to be a little bit creative. There's a little bit of an art to it.
And I would say to that creative point too, like I've been way more willing right now to draft kind of relatively off of ADP. Like I'm still making smart structural decisions, but I'm letting ADP kind of dictate those structures. When I think the ADP gets even more hyper efficient in August, some of these zero running backs candidates move way up because we have more information about them, their role on the depth chart. That's when I'm going to probably be ready to be even more aggressive with my zero RB strategies because people are going to become way more overconfident in these situations based on news, based on preseason than they should. And that's then where we can swing back and really fight against the grain with just structural drafting.
I'm primarily going one elite running back right now. That's the way I'm building most teams. And I'm trying to mix it up. I've taken a lot of Antonio Gibson. I love his upside, but I'm trying to mix it up a little bit. I was talking to you guys in the Discord about, seeing some paths to Eckler to, kind of a Kamara type season and figuring I didn't have enough exposure to that. But I really am trying to keep myself to just taking one stab and make it one elite running back builds, because then that allows you to get the elite tight end in round 2 if the ADP falls right. And then that also allows you to be super flexible late in the draft, where we were talking at the beginning of the show how there's so many running back values and you hammer wide receiver throughout. And I kind of like TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews again in the middle rounds. It allows you to still do the 2 tight end builds. So having the flexibility there and still feeling pretty good about your wide receivers like through 9 rounds is pretty nice if you just do the one elite running back build. But I agree with you. I think I will start doing some true zero running back builds on Underdog once we have better ADP. I haven't really done many of those yet. I'm looking forward to it though.
I found the spot I do them the most is when I draft Kelsey. I think that kind of naturally funnels me into them, because I think like if I draft Kelsey and then I'm drafting a running back at the back end of round 2, I'm just like immediately feeling squeezed for wide receivers. So yeah, I've mixed in a good bit of them, and I think we will naturally, just the way we gravitate, go to way more zero RB builds as the season goes on.
And I think that one running back makes a lot of sense if everyone's doing hyper fragile. Like if that's what you're seeing, there's still a lot of running backs going, and that's what the ADP data has been showing, right? Is that running backs are going higher in the second round and the third round than ever before. So you can still get that anchor running back in the first round and immediately go to pretty elite wide receivers in rounds 2 and 3 and not really sacrifice much from the concept of zero RB. I mean, you start to sacrifice things in round 6 when the wide receiver ADP catches up. But if you only go with one running back, like not like your Kelsey example, but go one running back and go immediately to wide receiver, you can still kind of get that advantage that zero RB provides of having multiple really high-end wide receivers, because people are hammering running backs so heavily through the third before they move away, and you get elite running back with it still. You're not really sacrificing anything there.
And I would even say the trend I'm seeing is almost more 2 running backs. I'm actually not seeing a lot of the 3, because people love some of these third round wide receivers. Like CeeDee Lamb just keeps inching up by the day in ADP. And
Davis Maddox, highest owned player.
Yeah.
He's a third round wide receiver.
It's crazy.
Just
But like, I remember last year, you know, like you said, Leone and those guys had started talking about hyperfragile. And I remember we were talking, Pat, it was so hard to pull off because in the third round, there was like no guys. It was like Connor was getting pushed up into the late second. You were praying for Jonathan Taylor to fall to you in the early to mid third to complete the 3 running back start. Now, like, you can have your pick. You want DeAndre Swift there? You want Miles Sanders there? You want Chris Carson there? Go for it. Like, a true just 3 running back start is more viable than it's ever been. It's because the 2 running back start that everybody loves, and then they start hammering wide receiver.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you're kind of pivoting away from that by just going with 1 at least. But man, you're really pivoting against it if you go true 0 running back. But I think I don't know. Part of me feels like we don't have enough ADP information, but there's that pocket there it's like Connor, Rojo, Pollard. Then there's like Dillon, Zach Moss, Darrell Henderson. You get a little later, Madison. There's like a whole group of guys that you could hammer through like rounds 9 through like 13. I mean, that'd be pretty nice. I think that you could actually. I want to do this, but I guess part of it's like I think because we don't have Rodgers, so Adams doesn't feel that great. Diggs I like a lot, obviously, but I don't like him that much better than the guys going, 6 picks after him. So it's just, I think you're right. I think you almost need Kelsey to make that start work.
That is the difference, because last year we had Devontae Adams and Michael Thomas, who were going very high, and then people were also excited about Tyreek Hill in the first round. So you could realistically get 3 first-round wide receivers. Now you're getting Tyreek Hill and maybe Diggs, but you have no one like. It's even making me think about starts from the 1 through 5 slot where I don't have a lot of wide receiver, like tight end wide receiver teams. Like, where I'm thinking, like, what if you just reach on Tyreek? Mm-hmm. So you get like Tyreek, Kittle, and then Justin Jefferson or whatever. I don't have a lot of those teams just by how ADP shakes out.
I think I like that a lot. I want to build some of those. Although I will say, so I was doing, I'm working on this article right now. I was planning on mentioning this as a show topic next week, so I won't dive too much into it.
I think we might get Crack Rock on next week too, by the way.
Oh, okay. Then maybe I'll spoil this then. But I'm working on this article that's basically just looking at like not average win rates, but like sub 5% win rates, and then like 20+% win rates, and seeing kind of like where those are coming from. And then I just plotted the win rates, like, so you can actually just see like over the last 6 seasons, like how kind of the win rates are falling. And, it's just very obvious that, one, running backs are busting way more often, which we know, but like the data clearly shows that running backs are just busting way more often in every round. But then also you're getting like 2 guys a season, maybe 1. 2015 had none, that are absolute fucking smashes, right? Christian McCaffrey 2018, Todd Gurley 2017, like the legendary, like you had to have this guy 25% win rate type of dude. And I do feel like in a tournament like this, if there is that guy this season, he is probably on the winning team, right? So there's, I want to have a fair amount of single elite running back tight ends or single elite running back builds to try to find that guy. And if I hit on that guy, hopefully I hit on enough around him to win the whole thing.
I will say, though, to your point, Pat, I think there's a guy that is on the most amount of week 1 through 13 teams that advance, for sure. But we saw it last year, like the reason Hertzig only was the only guy with Alvin Kamara is because Alvin Kamara flopped the week before. Even these total league winners, all it takes is 1 dud,
you're right,
and you nuke that team. So it boosts your league win rate, but not necessarily your chances to win the whole shebang.
That's a good point, and that's a good reason to build the 0 running back, because you're going to be way more unique entering that final week. And you might have like maybe week 17, no running back goes off in a huge way, and like 3 wide receivers have really good weeks, and you happen to have all 3, that type of thing. So you can see the path to being way more unique, which is Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the reason that I love that one running back build is to try to mine for that true league winner, but that might be more of a strategy, in a smaller to medium field tournament like the main event. Something like this, I wonder if we're underestimating the power of zero running back now that you mentioned that.
I think we're always underestimating the power of zero running back. And also, just to your point, I mean, I kind of miss the robust RB truthers from last year. I mean, if we could just have them back to push some of these wide receivers down for us, but we're glad you guys finally joined us. You came to your senses, and we appreciate that.
I don't know they came to their senses. I think they picked up another hobby.
So I think Crack Rock was saying he might join us next week. I think when we do get off here, we didn't have time because we wanted to dig into this stuff, but we will get a private draft on Underdog going on after this. Are you guys down for that? Yeah, we can get something going in the Discord with you guys. Anything else here for closing topics here? I thought this was a good deep dive here on draft strategy.
Pat mentioned not really being super stoked on Diggs. I think Diggs should be the wide receiver one. I just want to get that.
You seemed grumpy after I said that. Now I know why.
I'm kind of tired, but yeah. No, I think Diggs is going to absolutely destroy this year. Like, he was new in Buffalo last year. It wasn't as awesome early in the year. They really started, him and Allen, I thought, really started to gel throughout the year. Total film watching take, but I felt like on third downs when Allen scrambled, he started to learn that Diggs is really a freestyle route runner and would just like look for Diggs, and Diggs would get open. And they were getting so many third down completions. It's like it was just his guy. Like, he is they're just going to be so much more on lockstep on top of already being so good last year. I just think we're going to get what we got from him last year and then some. Like, he's going to be so freaking good this year.
I love it.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to get more Diggs.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, I will say, like, he is popular. It's hard to get him in the second round now on Underdog. Like, he's very rarely making it past like 111.
But like, why is he not the wide receiver one? Like, we know they're not even going to run the ball. They're going to throw like crazy. He led the NFL in receptions last year, and I believe yardage as well. In year 2 in Buffalo now, like, it's only going to be better.
Where do you think in a truly efficient draft, let's even just say the Underdog half point PPR, what do you think his draft spot should be?
Man, I mean, I think it still has to be after Kelsey, and like truly efficient. I think Kittle and Waller should go like crazy high too. I think they should go like by at least in the top 15 picks, like by the 1-2 turn.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I might take all 3 of those tight ends before Diggs, like just straight up if I was saying super efficient, but there might only be 5 running backs that I would take before Diggs. So he might still be in my.
What running backs are those? Because that is, I kind of am right now in this part of the year, I am like willing to talk myself into like way too many running backs.
Not Zeke. Not Zeke. And I don't think Taylor. I think I would take, like, in a complete vacuum, I think I would take Diggs over Taylor. So McCaffrey.
What about Akers?
And then I don't think Akers either. I wouldn't take him. I mean, I'm interested in him, but I wouldn't take him really as high as he's been going. I was talking to you guys. I think, and Pat, you made those points too. I think Eckler should be going about as high as Akers personally, but I like Akers a lot. But yeah, so McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, probably 3 for me. Henry, Barkley, those guys I think are all, worth being first round picks pretty easily. But Diggs to me shouldn't be much further behind that. The tight ends would be the tricky part.
Yeah. Well, but to your point, like, if you're sitting in the back of the draft at in your the efficient draft, and I agree, like, if you're at 1-9, I mean, you can do Diggs and Kittle or Waller like every time if you want.
Every time, yeah.
That's like such a great start. I mean, I freaking love that.
Yeah,
and then I'm gonna go do a bunch of wide receivers after that.
It is. That's what we're doing here. All right, guys. I will. After this ends, I will share a link to a private draft for whoever wants to do a little $5 12-man. I know how it goes. We talk about drafting strategies and we get the itch to draft, so we will do that. Gretch, you got Stealing Bananas. You got ETR Projection Pod. What else you got going on?
Yeah, those are the two main things right now. Starting up 2 new pods. The one with Leone is going to be great, but it's going to be a limited run for 8 episodes. We're just going to go division by division, do all the projections. Definitely hope you guys check that out. The one with Sean, obviously, I'm incredibly excited about. It's going to be a long-term thing. We're going to do it into the season and hopefully for years to come. We've been talking about kind of doing something like this for a while, so that's a really exciting one as well. They just happened to both start the same week. Like, I was talking to them independently, and it just worked out that way. But both are things that I'm super excited about, and yeah, check them out.
Awesome. And then a few other housekeeping things for us. We are close to getting all of our ship chasing co-managing main event draft scheduled. We do have a few random slots available if you're interested in drafting. I believe it's going to be Wednesday, August 25th with Silas. We're looking for one more co-manager there, and we're also looking for a third for a slow draft in July. We got DFS Texas and Worm looking for a third co-manager there. So if you guys are part of the Discord, one of the VIPs, and would like to be a part of that, shoot us a DM. We're close to wrapping that up. Looking forward to that. Pat, any other plugs for you on your end?
I will say I wrote a preview of the Lions as we're doing all these 32 team previews on NBC Sports Edge. I had a lot of fun writing this article, so check that out if you get a chance. I really... They are a crazy team. Dan Campbell said some crazy stuff. I kind of defended them a little bit, which was both felt weird and was fun. But yeah, if you,
that
if
was
you
a
get
good
a chance,
sell. I would
read.
not have clicked on your Lions write-up, but now I'm going to.
Yeah, it's like I made several caveats. Like, I'm not saying it's gonna be awesome, but like, hang on. So, it was a pretty good one.
And you also claim to be a film guy now too, right, Pat?
I did claim multiple times to now be a film guy. So
I just shared the link to this draft in the Discord. Looks like we got 4 or 5 more spots left. So we will catch you guys over there. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will be here every Wednesday night and much more coming through draft season. We'll have a kind of a more official schedule coming soon, but lots of drafts, lots of fun here on Ship Chasing. Thanks to Gretch. Thanks to Karain. We'll see you guys next week.